Redditors, what's the thing which you learnt the hard way and had changed something very fundamental in you? I've been sitting with this post open for 3 days. Not because I don't know what to say, because I know exactly what to say, and saying it means it's real in a way it hasn't been yet, or at least in a way I haven't let it be. My therapist, I'll come back to her, says I process things by containing them, that I'm very good at building walls around experiences and living around the walls, and that eventually the thing inside the wall needs to come out, or the wall becomes load-bearing in a way that costs more than the thing it's containing. So, this is me taking down a wall. Someone posted asking what you learned the hard way that changed something fundamental. I've been reading the responses for 3 days. Some of them made me feel less alone. One of them made me write this. I'm going to tell you what I learned and what it cost me, and why I'm passing it on. I grew up in a house where my father hit me. I want to say that plainly because I spent a long time not saying it plainly, finding other words for it, softening the edges. He had a temper. Things were difficult. It was complicated. It wasn't complicated. He hit me, repeatedly. From an age I can no longer precisely identify because the memory of before is so far back it exists more as a texture than as events, a specific quality of tension in a house, a way of reading footsteps on the stairs, a knowledge of which sounds meant what. I was hospitalized 3 times before I was 16. The story my parents told, and I want to say my parents deliberately because my mother was part of this, I understood that even then, and I'll come back to it, was that I was difficult, that I got into fights, that the bruises, the hairline fracture in my left forearm at 11 years old, the concussion at 14, these were the results of a boy who couldn't stay out of trouble. Teachers received this version. Doctors received this version. The one time a school counselor asked me directly, I said the version my parents had given me because I was 14 and I didn't have another language yet. And the language you're given in a house is the language you use until you find your own. I found my own at 18. I left the day I turned 18. Not dramatically, I had a bag packed, I had a plan. I had a job lined up in a city far enough away that the distance was a statement even if I didn't say it. I told my mother I was going. She said nothing useful. I walked out. 2 years of no contact. 2 years of building. A job. Then a better job. A flat that was mine. A life arranged around the specific pleasure of a house where I controlled the temperature of every room in every sense of the word. Quiet. Predictable. Safe in the way that only feels remarkable if you've lived in its opposite. I was 20 years old and I was okay. And then my phone rang. The number was a hospital in my hometown. I want to tell you what I felt when I saw the area code because I think it matters. Before I answered, I sat with the phone in my hand, and I felt something that I've since learned to identify as the specific pull of a wound that hasn't fully closed, a tug in the direction of something you've been protecting yourself from. Not love exactly. Something more biological than love. Something older. I answered. My mother was in hospital. I was listed as her emergency contact. The nurse on the phone was careful with her words in the way that nurses are careful when the situation is one they've navigated before. She said my mother had sustained injuries. She said she was stable. She asked if I could come. I drove through the night. I want to tell you what I saw when I walked into that ward, because this is the moment I need to relive to put it down. My mother was in a bed by the window. Smaller than I remembered. People do that. They shrink in the years you're not watching them. She had a bandage on her left forearm, bruising across the left side of her face. A careful stillness in the way she held herself that I recognized in my body before I recognized it in my mind. I had held myself that way. At 11, at 14, at 17. That specific stillness of a body that has learned to exist carefully around its own pain. I stood at the end of the bed, and I understood something that arrived not as a thought but as a physical sensation. A sickening, dropping thing in my chest. When I left, it hadn't stopped. It had redirected. I had removed myself from the equation, and the equation had simply found a new variable. 2 years of my carefully constructed distance. 2 years of my quiet flat and my controlled temperature and my life that was finally mine. And while I was building that life, my mother was in a hospital bed with a bandage on the arm that corresponded exactly to the arm that had a hairline fracture at 11 years old. I sat down next to her. She looked at me. I said, "How long?" She looked away. I said, "How long has it been like this?" She said, "You shouldn't have come." I said, "I'm going to need you to answer the question." She didn't answer the question. I sat with her anyway. For 3 days I sat with her. I watched the nurses come and go. I watched the doctors do their rounds. I watched my mother exist in the careful stillness of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible, and I felt something that I want to name accurately. I felt responsible. Not guilty. I want to be precise about that because the distinction matters, and I've spent a long time in therapy understanding it. I didn't cause what my father did. I didn't cause the redirection of it. I was a child who survived by leaving, and leaving was the right thing to do, and I don't carry guilt for it. What I felt was responsible. The specific weight of someone who sees a situation and understands that they are the person best positioned to do something about it. That the information they have and the distance they have and the 2 years of building they have produced someone capable of intervening in a way that the person inside the situation cannot intervene for themselves. I decided to try. What came next I'm going to tell you in the way it actually happened, rather than the way it looks from outside, because the outside version is a sequence of events, and the inside version is a state of being. The inside version is this. For 8 months I lived in 2 places simultaneously. The life I'd built and the situation I was trying to fix. I drove back to my hometown on weekends. I made calls on my lunch breaks. I spent evenings researching things I'd never needed to research before: protective orders, housing options, legal aid, the specific paperwork involved in extricating one person from a life they shared with another person who didn't want them to leave. My mother was not easy to help. I want to say that without judgment, because I understand more now than I did then about why people in abusive situations don't move in straight lines toward safety. About the psychology of it. About what decades of a specific kind of relationship does to a person's understanding of what they deserve and what is possible, and what leaving actually means. I understood that then too, intellectually. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't understand until it happened, was that understanding it doesn't protect you from the cost of it. She would agree and then withdraw. She would take a step forward and then a step back. She would tell me things about her situation and then minimize them. She would let me get close and then put distance between us, and I kept coming back because I genuinely believed, that if I was consistent enough, patient enough, present enough, she would eventually arrive at the decision that was available to her. I was wrong about that. But I didn't know I was wrong yet. The legal process was my idea, and my father's response was to get a solicitor. I won't detail the specifics of the case because they're still somewhere in the legal record, and I have no interest in revisiting them beyond what's necessary. What I'll tell you is what the solicitor said in the preliminary hearing about the basis of my father's defense and what happened the week before the substantive hearing. My mother called me. She said she needed to see me. I drove to the cafe where we'd been meeting, a place I'd chosen specifically because it was neutral and public and my father didn't know about it, or so I believed. She sat across from me, and she looked at her hands for a long time. Then she told me she was going to testify. I said, "I know, that's fine, you'll tell them." She said, "I'm going to testify for your father." I want to tell you what the silence after that sentence was like. It was the kind of silence that has weight, the kind that arrives when something you knew was possible, but had refused to fully consider suddenly becomes the thing that is happening. I had known, somewhere below the level of active thought, in the part of me that had grown up in that house and learned to read situations, that this was possible. I had known, and I had chosen not to know because not knowing was the only way I could keep doing what I was doing. I looked at my mother. She was still looking at her hands. I said, "You've been telling him." Not a question. She said, "He's my husband." I said, "He put you in hospital." She said, "You don't understand." I said, "I understand more than you know." She looked up then, just briefly, and I saw something in her face that I've thought about many times since. Not cruelty, not indifference, something more complicated and more painful than either of those things. Something that looked like a person who had made their choice a very long time ago and had stopped being able to imagine another one. I drove home. I sat in my flat. I didn't sleep. The hearing was the following week. My mother sat in that courtroom and she answered questions. She said the things she had been told to say or had chosen to say. I don't know which, and it doesn't matter. She described my intervention as unwanted. She described our meetings as me pressuring her. She described a version of events that required me to be the problem and my father to be the wronged party, and she delivered this version in the careful, quiet voice of someone who has rehearsed it. I sat across the room and I watched her. I want to tell you what I felt watching her, and I want to be honest about it because I think the honesty is the point of writing this. I felt nothing. Not in the moment. In the moment I felt everything, a specific everything that I won't try to fully describe. But underneath the everything there was a place that had gone quiet. A place that had been, I don't know the right word. Switched off is too mechanical. Exhausted is too simple. It was more like a light going out. Quietly, without announcement. I lost the case. The fine was significant. The legal costs were significant. I drove home with a number in my head that represented everything I'd saved in 2 years of building and some of what I'd need to rebuild. I rebuilt. 5 years. 5 years of not thinking about it more than I had to. Of putting distance between myself and what had happened in the way that you put distance between yourself and a place that hurt you, not by forgetting, by building enough of a life in front of it that the view changes. I have a career, something I built carefully and methodically in the same way I've built everything since I walked out at 18 with a bag and a plan. It isn't glamorous. It's mine in every sense of the word, and that ownership is the thing I value most about it. I was at my desk on a Tuesday morning. Ordinary Tuesday. Nothing significant about it. I was working on something that required concentration, and I was concentrating, and my phone was face down on the desk, and when it rang, I turned it over with the automatic motion of someone who answers calls while working. The number was from my hometown. A distant relative, a name I knew but barely. She was calling, she said, because she thought I should know, because she wasn't sure if anyone would tell me otherwise, because she had always thought someone should have done more. My mother had died. Blunt force trauma to the head. My father was missing. I want to tell you what I felt. I felt nothing. Not the theatrical nothing of someone performing composure. The actual nothing of someone who reaches for a feeling that should be there and finds the place where it used to live empty. I had spent everything I had on that feeling in that courtroom 5 years ago, and there was nothing left of it. I said thank you for calling. I hung up. I went back to work. I did not go to the funeral. I did not retrieve whatever memories I had kept of my mother from the place I'd stored them. I left them there. I closed the door. I haven't opened it since. Here is what I learned. I don't have a word for the thing I lost. I've looked for one and I haven't found it. It isn't innocence, that went earlier. It isn't hope exactly, because I still have hope in other directions. It's something more specific than either of those. The closest I can get is this. There was a part of me that believed, that had always believed, even through everything, even through the flat with the controlled temperature and the distance I'd put between myself and my childhood, that love was a sufficient reason to try. That if you cared enough about someone, if you showed up enough times and absorbed enough cost and kept your hand extended long enough, eventually the hand would be taken. I don't believe that anymore. Not because it's never true. Maybe it's true sometimes. Maybe there are situations where the showing up is enough and the hand gets taken, and the thing you were trying to do becomes the thing that happened. My situation wasn't one of them. And the cost of learning that it wasn't was paid in a courtroom where my mother answered questions that put me on the wrong side of a judgment, and in a phone call on an ordinary Tuesday, and in the specific shape of an absence where a feeling used to be. I'm not telling you not to try. I'm telling you to know before you try that trying has a cost, that the cost is not always proportional to the outcome, that you can do everything right, show up, be patient, be present, sacrifice the things that cost you most to sacrifice, and the person you're trying to reach can still choose otherwise, can choose in a direction that costs you something you didn't know you had until it was gone. You cannot save someone who has decided not to be saved. I know this now. I paid for the knowledge. I'm passing it on because the price was too high for it to stay only with me. Edit, I wasn't expecting this response. Thank you to everyone who read this and to those who reached out directly. I've read every message even where I haven't been able to reply to all of them. To answer the question several people asked, yes, I'm okay. More than okay, genuinely. I started seeing a therapist about 18 months ago, not specifically because of this, but because I'd been carrying a lot of things for a long time, and I'd finally reached the point of understanding that carrying them alone was a choice rather than a necessity. She's helped me understand a lot of what I've written here in ways I couldn't have articulated before I started seeing her. The post isn't a cry for help. It's exactly what I said it was, me taking down a wall, putting something outside myself so it stops being load-bearing. The responses have made that easier than I expected, and I'm grateful for that in a way I don't quite have the words for yet. I'm well, I'm working. I have a life I built and I'm proud of it and I'm okay. That's enough. For now, that's more than enough.